Captain Jake Morrison stood in the middle of what could only be described as the universe's most pretentious conference room. The Galactic Council chamber stretched out like a chrome-plated cathedral, filled with beings that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of very confused artists. Jake adjusted his uniform and tried not to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. "Greetings, primitive carbon-based life forms," announced Ambassador Glebnox, a slug-like creature wearing what appeared to be a golden trash can lid as a hat. His voice carried the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic math to particularly slow children. "We, the esteemed Galactic Council, graciously welcome you to our illustrious civilization." Jake bit back his first 3 responses, all of which would have gotten humanity kicked out before they'd even gotten their welcome packet. "On behalf of humanity," Jake said, managing to keep his voice level, "we're honored to join your organization." The word honored tasted like week-old coffee, but diplomacy required certain sacrifices. Commander Vextar, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a particularly aggressive linebacker, clicked his mandibles disapprovingly. "The humans appear structurally deficient. No natural armor, inadequate sensory organs, and their limbs seem designed for basic tool manipulation at best." "Fascinating," chimed Professor Quibble, a being that resembled a walking calculator with too many eyes. "Their neural processing appears limited to single-threaded operations. Most curious that they achieved spaceflight at all." Jake smiled the kind of smile that had gotten him in trouble with superior officers for most of his military career. "Well, we're nothing if not surprising." Glebnox's eye stalk swiveled toward Jake with the enthusiasm of a funeral director. "Indeed, your species shows remarkable potential for assigned duties appropriate to your capabilities. We have prepared a comprehensive orientation package detailing your new responsibilities within our galactic community." A holographic display materialized, showing humans in various service positions. Jake watched cartoon versions of his species cleaning alien toilets, serving food, and performing what appeared to be the galactic equivalent of ditch digging. The presentation was set to upbeat music that sounded like elevator jazz played through a broken speaker. "As you can see," Glebnox continued, "humans will find fulfilling careers in sanitation, food service, manual labor, and basic maintenance. These roles perfectly match your species' limitations while contributing meaningfully to galactic society." Jake's jaw worked silently for a moment. Around the chamber, dozens of alien species watched with expressions ranging from bored indifference to barely concealed amusement. The humans, it seemed, were the galaxy's newest comedy act. "And what about positions in defense, exploration, or governance?" Jake asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to cut glass. The chamber erupted in what Jake assumed was laughter, though it sounded like a symphony of dying farm animals. Vextar's mandibles clicked so rapidly they created a percussion section. "Defense?" Vextar wheezed between clicks. "Your species lacks basic combat adaptations. No natural weapons, poor reflexes, limited strength ratios. You would be more dangerous to yourselves than any enemy." Professor Quibble's mechanical voice joined the chorus. "Their tactical analysis capabilities appear constrained by linear thinking patterns. Quite unsuitable for strategic operations requiring multidimensional probability matrices." Glebnox raised a tentacle for silence. "Please do not mistake our guidance for dismissal. Every species has its place in the galactic hierarchy. Yours simply happens to be at the foundation level, providing essential support services that allow superior beings to focus on important matters." Jake nodded slowly, filing away every word, every laugh, every condescending gesture. "I see. And this hierarchy, it's based on what exactly?" "Natural superiority." "Obviously," Glebnox replied. "Some species are born to lead, others to follow. Some to think, others to serve. It is the natural order of things." "Natural order," Jake repeated. "Right." 3 weeks into humanity's galactic debut, Jake found himself standing in what the aliens called a career placement facility, but looked suspiciously like a job fair designed by sadists. Holographic displays showed humans in increasingly degrading positions while cheerful alien music played in the background. "Sanitation Engineer Level 1, announced the placement coordinator, a being that looked like a sentient filing cabinet. "Specializing in waste management for non-bipedal species. Very prestigious for humans." Jake watched as Maria Santos, his former lieutenant and current fellow representative, received her assignment to nutritional distribution specialist, which translated to alien lunch lady. Tommy Rodriguez got tagged as manual labor coordinator, fancy words for guy who lifts heavy things. This is fantastic, Jake muttered, watching another human get assigned to atmospheric maintenance on a planet where the atmosphere was apparently toxic to most known life forms. Really hitting the jackpot here. The placement coordinator's optical sensors swiveled toward Jake with mechanical precision. Captain Morrison, your assignment is particularly exciting. You will serve as human liaison for sanitation coordination, a leadership position. Let me guess, Jake said. I coordinate which toilets the other humans clean. Precisely. See how quickly humans adapt to appropriate roles. Before Jake could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the facility. The coordinator's screens flickered to emergency broadcasts showing explosions across multiple star systems. Jake recognized military formations and tactical displays, even when they were rendered in alien holographics. What's happening? Maria asked, her lunch lady training apparently not covering galactic emergencies. Commander Vextar materialized via hologram, his mandibles clicking in what Jake was learning to recognize as extreme agitation. The Zephyrian Empire has launched coordinated attacks on 17 systems. They have deployed their new quantum disruption weapons. The situation is critical. Glebnox appeared on another screen, his slug-like features somehow managing to convey panic. Emergency council session in 30 minutes. All senior species representatives required immediately. Jake stepped forward. What about human representatives? The filing cabinet coordinator made a sound like a printer having an existential crisis. Humans do not qualify for emergency military sessions. Please return to orientation activities. Like hell, Jake said, his diplomatic mask finally slipping. If there's a war starting, we want in. More of that dying farm animal laughter echoed from the alien speakers. Vextar's image flickered with static as he clicked dismissively. Human participation in military operations is prohibited for safety reasons. Both yours and ours. Our safety? Tommy asked, flexing muscles that had carried him through 3 human wars. You would interfere with proper military operations, Vextar explained with the patience of someone talking to particularly dense children. Your species lacks the cognitive capacity for advanced warfare. Better to leave such matters to qualified beings. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a familiar sensation from his days commanding human forces. It was the feeling he got right before someone learned why humans had conquered their own planet so thoroughly. So we just sit here and wait? Maria asked. Precisely, Glebnox confirmed. The council will form a committee to analyze the situation, then form a subcommittee to review the analysis, then establish a task force to implement recommendations from the subcommittee's findings. How long does that usually take? Jake asked. Approximately 6 to 8 standard months, depending on bureaucratic availability. Jake looked at Maria and Tommy, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. Around them, other humans were getting the same message from their alien supervisors. Stay back, stay quiet, stay useless. And in the meantime? Jake pressed. The Zephyrians will likely conquer several more systems, Professor Quibble added helpfully. Standard expansion patterns suggest they will control approximately 40% of Council territory before our response protocols are fully implemented. 40%, Jake repeated slowly. Perhaps 50, Quibble corrected after running some calculations. The Zephyrians are quite efficient. Jake smiled again, but this time it wasn't diplomatic. This time it was the smile that had preceded some of the most creative military solutions in human history. Well, he said, good thing you've got a plan. Part 3. The Art of Human Warfare. The emergency council session was exactly what Jake had expected. A lot of talk, very little action, and enough bureaucratic doublespeak to choke a politician. He sat in the designated junior species observation area, basically the galactic equivalent of the kids' table, and watched the circus unfold. The Zephyrian assault on Verdania has eliminated our primary agricultural research station, reported General Claxon, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. Their quantum disruptors are proving highly effective against our conventional defenses. Verdania's holographic display showed a green, peaceful world now decorated with smoking craters and energy weapon scars. Jake counted the tactical positions automatically, noting supply lines, defensive weak points, and approximately 6 different ways he could have prevented the disaster. "I propose we form an emergency committee," Glebnox announced, "to establish protocols for forming a crisis response committee." "Seconded," agreed Ambassador Flibber, who looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a bureaucrat. "But first we need a committee to determine the appropriate committee formation procedures." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. Around him, the council devolved into arguments about parliamentary procedure, while an entire world burned on their screens. "The Zephyrian quantum technology represents a significant advancement," Professor Quibble noted. "Our computer models suggest a 97.3% probability of continued territorial losses, unless we develop countermeasures within the next 4.7 standard years." "4 years?" Maria whispered from beside Jake. "The war will be over in 4 months at this rate." Commander Vextar clicked his mandibles authoritatively. "I propose deploying our elite Korvax battalions to establish a defensive perimeter around the remaining agricultural worlds." Jake had seen footage of the Korvax battalions, elite soldiers with advanced technology, perfect discipline, and absolutely no imagination. They fought like they were following an instruction manual, which worked great until someone changed the rules. "Permission to speak," Jake called out, standing in the observation area. The chamber fell silent. Dozens of alien eyes, stalks, and sensors turned toward him with expressions ranging from surprise to irritation. "The human request recognition," Glebnox announced with the tone usually reserved for announcing toilet breaks. "Most irregular." "Captain Morrison," Vextar clicked dismissively, "this session is restricted to species with military capability ratings above minimum threshold. Your presence is observational only." Jake smiled his dangerous smile again. "Right. Observational. Well, I've been observing, and I've got some observations." "The human appears agitated," Professor Quibble noted. "Elevated vocal patterns suggest emotional distress. Should we summon medical assistance?" "I'm fine," Jake said, his voice carrying across the chamber with parade ground authority. "But your war effort isn't." The chamber erupted in indignant alien noises. Jake waited for them to quiet down, then continued. "You're fighting the Zephyrians like they're still using last century's tactics. Your Korvax battalions are excellent soldiers, but they're predictable. The Zephyrians have adapted, you haven't." Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Human military analysis is noted and dismissed. Your species lacks the neural architecture for advanced tactical thinking." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But we've got something else. Tommy, Maria, want to explain human military doctrine to the nice aliens?" Tommy stood up, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, and smiled like a predator. "Human military doctrine is real simple. If something's shooting at you, shoot back harder. If something's in your way, go around it, over it, under it, or through it. If the enemy expects you to do something else." Maria nodded. "We call it adaptive problem solving. The technical term is making stuff up as you go along." The chamber filled with more alien laughter, but Jake noticed it sounded a little forced this time. "Fascinating," Professor Quibble said. "Chaos-based military theory. Completely impractical for organized warfare." "Is it?" Jake asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, your organized warfare is getting its ass kicked by lizards with fancy guns." The laughter stopped. Lieutenant Santos and Sergeant Rodriguez flanked Jake as he continued. "You want our help with evacuation efforts? Fine. Give us ships, give us access to Verdania, and we'll show you how humans handle impossible situations." Commander Vextar's mandibles went still. "Impossible situations?" Jake's smile turned predatory. "Commander, impossible is where we do our best work." 48 hours later, Jake found himself on the bridge of a hastily retrofitted council transport ship, watching Verdania grow larger on the view screen. The planet looked worse up close, with Zephyrian battlecruisers maintaining orbital bombardment positions and fighter squadrons patrolling established lanes. Sensors indicate 14 Zephyrian capital ships in defensive formation, reported Ensign Park, one of 30 humans who had volunteered for what the Council was calling evacuation support duties. Standard Imperial battle doctrine, textbook positioning. Maria studied the tactical display from the weapons console they weren't supposed to understand. Predictable, she muttered. Tommy, you seeing this? Sergeant Rodriguez nodded from the engineering station. Like they're following a manual. Same formations we studied at the academy, just with fancier ships. Jake activated the communications array, broadcasting on the frequency the Council had designated for evacuation coordination. Zephyrian Command. This is evacuation vessel Mercy Run requesting safe passage to retrieve civilian populations. The response came immediately, translated by the ship's computer into flat, mechanical English. Human vessel, you are not authorized in this combat zone. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Just trying to save some lives here, Jake replied, letting his voice carry the right amount of nervous concern. We're not military, just civilian evacuation. Humans possess no military capability, the Zephyrian commander responded, contempt clear even through the translation matrix. Your presence is irrelevant. Withdraw or be destroyed as an inconvenience. Jake muted the comm and turned to his crew. Maria, how long to get targeting solutions on their command ship? Already locked, she replied. These retrofitted Council weapons are actually pretty decent once you figure out the interface. Tommy, status on those evacuation pods we loaded? Rodriguez grinned. 47 modified torpedo casings loaded with everything from high explosives to sensor scramblers. The Council quartermaster was very helpful once we explained we needed them for emergency supply drops. Jake reopened the comm channel. Zephyrian Command, we're going to proceed with evacuation operations. Thank you for your understanding. The Zephyrian response was immediate and predictable. Human vessel, you have 30 seconds to withdraw before we demonstrate why inferior species should not interfere with Imperial operations. 30 seconds, Jake mused. Maria, can you paint their flagship with a targeting laser? Already done. Tommy's got surprise packages loaded and ready. Outstanding. Park, take us in toward the planet. Full speed, erratic course. The Mercy Run dove toward Verdania like a drunken meteor, dodging between the Zephyrian capital ships while the aliens tried to figure out what the crazy humans were doing. Jake counted down the seconds, watching the enemy formation react exactly as their doctrine demanded. Predictable, he muttered, then keyed the comm. Now would be good, Tommy. The first evacuation pod launched toward the Zephyrian flagship, just as their weapons locked onto the human ship. But instead of the expected explosive warhead, the pod deployed a cloud of metallic chaff that turned their targeting sensors into abstract art displays. What the hell? Came the translated response from the Zephyrian bridge. Evacuation supplies, Jake replied cheerfully, as the second pod deployed an electromagnetic pulse that knocked out the flagship's communications array. The medical equipment, food, that sort of thing. The third pod contained actual high explosives, but instead of targeting the ship's hull, it detonated against their primary sensor array. The fourth pod released a cloud of nanoscale metal particles that adhered to their hull and began interfering with their energy weapons. This is not standard evacuation protocol. The Zephyrian commander managed to transmit before the fifth pod deployed what Tommy had labeled psychological warfare supplies, essentially a massive strobe light and sound system broadcasting the most annoying human music they could find. Since when do humans follow standard protocol? Jake asked, as Maria opened fire with their main weapons. The Zephyrian fleet reacted exactly as their training demanded. They moved to establish defensive positions while their flagship dealt with the immediate threat. Unfortunately, their immediate threat was a ship full of humans who had thrown the tactical manual out the airlock somewhere around the second pod. Maria's weapons fire wasn't aimed at their ships. It was aimed at the empty space between them, creating a pattern of energy discharges that looked random but effectively herded the Zephyrian vessels into predetermined positions. Tommy's next barrage of evacuation supplies included gravity bombs that altered local spacetime just enough to make their formation maneuvers fail catastrophically. Within 10 minutes, the superior Zephyrian fleet found itself scattered, confused, and completely unable to predict what the insane humans would do next. Their formation doctrine became a liability when facing opponents who changed tactics every 30 seconds. Unknown vessel, came a new transmission from the Council fleet that had been maintaining a safe distance. Please identify your tactical methodology. Jake looked around his bridge, where humans were improvising solutions to problems that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. Adapting to each new crisis with the kind of creative flexibility that came from evolving on a planet that had tried to kill them for millions of years. Tactical methodology? Jake keyed the comm. We're making it up as we go along. The Zephyrian flagship, still dealing with strobing lights and music that sounded like cats being murdered, finally managed to clear their sensors long enough to lock weapons on the human ship. But by then, Jake had already moved to Phase 2 of his completely improvised plan. Tommy, deploy the special evacuation supplies. Which ones? Man, all of them. The remaining pods launched simultaneously, each one containing a different surprise that no military doctrine in the galaxy had prepared the Zephyrians to handle. The combined effect was less like a coordinated attack and more like weaponized chaos theory. This is impossible, the Zephyrian commander transmitted, his voice straying clear even through the translation. Your tactics make no logical sense. Jake smiled as his ship dove toward the planet's surface, leaving the Zephyrian fleet in complete disarray. Commander, logic is for species that evolved somewhere safe. The Emergency Council session 3 days later had a very different atmosphere than the previous one. For starters, nobody was laughing at the humans anymore. Ambassador Glebnox's eye stalks kept twitching toward Jake with what could only be described as nervous respect. The Zephyrian fleet has withdrawn from 17 systems, General Klaxon reported, his crystalline voice carrying a note of bewilderment. Their military command is apparently requesting reinforcements to deal with what they are calling tactical anomalies. Professor Quibble's mechanical voice added helpful context. Analysis of the Verdania engagement shows human forces achieved a 100% mission success rate using methodologies that should not mathematically function. Commander Vextar's mandibles clicked in patterns Jake was learning to recognize as deep confusion. Human casualties were 0. Zephyrian casualties were also 0. But their psychological trauma rating suggests they will require extensive therapy before returning to combat operations. Jake sat in his chair, no longer at the kids' table, he noticed, and tried to look innocent. Around him, Maria and Tommy maintained expressions of professional interest while the entire Galactic Council tried to figure out what had happened to their neat, orderly universe. Captain Morrison, Glebnox began carefully, perhaps you could explain your tactical approach for the Council's educational benefit. Simple, Jake replied. We figured out what they expected us to do, then did something else. Something else, Vextar repeated slowly. Different something else every time, Maria added helpfully. The technical term is adaptive improvisation, Tommy said, using words he'd clearly rehearsed. We kept changing the rules until they couldn't keep up. The chamber fell silent except for the sounds of aliens trying to process concepts that violated everything they thought they knew about warfare. Ambassador Flibber finally spoke up. But surely you had a plan? Some overarching strategy? Jake exchanged glances with his team. Our plan was to not have a plan. Hard to counter tactics that don't exist until we make them up. Professor Quibble's computational systems made sounds like a computer having an aneurysm. Chaos-based military doctrine should result in self-destruction. The probability matrices are completely contradictory. Maybe for your species, Jake said. Humans are pretty good at making chaos work for us. We've had a lot of practice. Glebnox's tentacles writhed in what Jake hoped was thoughtful consideration rather than preparation for violence. The Council must discuss these developments. The implications for galactic security are significant. About that, Jake said, standing up with the casual confidence that had gotten him promoted through most of his military career. We need to talk about humanity's role in this organization. Your role? Vextar's mandibles froze mid-click. The sanitation and food service thing isn't really working out, Maria said. Humans are apparently better at breaking things than we are at cleaning them. We're thinking more along the lines of security consulting, Tommy added. Threat assessment, tactical analysis, that sort of thing. The silence stretched until Jake began to wonder if he'd accidentally triggered some kind of collective alien stroke. Finally, Glebnox spoke. You want to be promoted from waste management to military leadership? Not leadership, Jake corrected. Partnership. You folks are great at organization, logistics, long-term planning, all that stuff. But when someone needs to think outside the box, break some rules, or solve impossible problems, you call humans. Maria finished. Professor Quibble's voice carried a note of what might have been panic. The galactic hierarchy cannot simply be restructured based on one successful engagement. One? Jake laughed. Commander Vex Tar, how many distress calls has the Council received in the last 72 hours? Vex Tar's mandibles clicked reluctantly. 47 systems have requested human assistance with various security issues. And how many species have submitted applications to establish trade relationships with humanity? 234, Glebnox admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled, but this time it wasn't dangerous or diplomatic. This time it was the smile of someone who had just won a very long game. Looks like the hierarchy is restructuring itself. The chamber erupted in alien chatter as the council members realized that their carefully ordered universe had just been turned upside down by a species they'd assigned a toilet, no less than a month ago. Ambassador Flibber's jellyfish-like form pulsed nervously. But if humans become a major military power, what does that mean for the rest of us? Jake looked around the chamber, taking in the faces, or face equivalents, of beings who had spent centuries assuming they were the dominant forms of life in the galaxy. It means, he said, you're about to find out why we conquered our own planet before we even learned how to fly. 6 months later, Jake stood in his new office overlooking the Galactic Council's military command center. Through the windows, he could see human advisors working alongside alien strategists, but human engineers retrofitting council ships with what they were calling adaptive response systems, and human trainers teaching alien forces the fine art of tactical improvisation. The nameplate on his desk read Director of Unconventional Solutions, BF, a title the council had created when they realized they couldn't fit guy who makes impossible problems go away onto official documents. Status report, Jake said to Maria, who now held the title of Chief of Adaptive Operations. The Korvax have successfully implemented human-style flexible tactics, she reported. Their latest engagement with Zephyrian forces resulted in complete enemy withdrawal with 0 casualties on either side. Psychological casualties? Jake asked. 14 Zephyrian commanders have requested medical leave, Tommy added from the doorway. He wore the insignia of Director of Creative Problem Resolution, a job that seemed to involve teaching aliens how to think like humans. Turns out lizard brains don't handle unpredictability very well. Through the communication system, Ambassador Glebnox's voice carried the tone of someone who had accepted his fate. Director Morrison, we have received requests for human consultation from 37 new systems this week. What's the nature of the requests? Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. 17 are facing territorial disputes they cannot resolve through conventional diplomacy. 12 have encountered technological problems that exceed their analytical capabilities. 8 are dealing with what they describe as impossible situations. Jake smiled, looking out at a galaxy that had spent millennia believing in the natural order of superior and inferior species. Now that same galaxy was lining up to ask the former toilet cleaners for help with problems that couldn't be solved by committee. And the Zephyrian Empire? Complete withdrawal from all contested territories, Glebnox reported. Their high command has issued a statement declaring humans a tactical impossibility and requesting a non-aggression pact. A non-aggression pact, Jake repeated, with the species they thought were too primitive to understand basic warfare. The irony is not lost on us, Professor Quibble added, his mechanical voice carrying what might have been amusement. Humanity has achieved in 6 months what the Council could not accomplish in 6 decades. Jake turned back to his team, humans who had gone from being galactic janitors to the most requested problem solvers in known space. You know what the best part is? What's that? Maria asked. We're still making it up as we go along. Tommy laughed. Think they've figured that out yet? Are you kidding? Jake gestured toward the command center, where alien species that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were now taking notes from humans who had learned most of their tactics by playing video games and reading military history. They're so busy trying to understand our methods, they haven't realized we don't have any. The communication system crackled with another incoming request. Director Morrison, this is Admiral Claxon. We have a situation developing in the Outer Rim that requires immediate human consultation. What kind of situation? Jake asked. The kind that violates several laws of physics and at least 3 principles of common sense. Jake exchanged glances with his team. Sounds like a Tuesday. We'll be right there. As they headed for the door, Jake paused to look back at his office. 6 months ago, humanity had been assigned to clean alien toilets because that was apparently the limit of their capabilities. Now they were running security operations for half the galaxy and teaching advanced civilizations how to think outside the box. You know what the Council's biggest mistake was? He asked Maria and Tommy. Assuming we were stupid? Maria suggested. Underestimating human stubbornness? Tommy offered. Aye? Jake shook his head. They thought being primitive was a weakness. They forgot that sometimes being primitive just means you haven't learned what's supposed to be impossible yet. He looked out one last time at the galaxy that had welcomed humanity as junior members and now couldn't function without them. The natural order had been turned completely upside down, and the species that had evolved to follow rules were now dependent on the species that had evolved to break them. Welcome to the human era, Jake said to no one in particular. Population, everyone who's smart enough to ask for help. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Zephyrian Empire was probably still trying to figure out how a species too primitive for military service had become the most feared tactical consultants in the galaxy. The answer, of course, was simple. They had asked humans to solve an impossible problem, and humans had responded the way they always did. They made something up, and somehow it worked.